Good evening and welcome to Mid-Valley Bible Church's Thanksgiving Eve prayer time. My name is Doug Hornock and I'm the pastor here at Mid-Valley. One of the songs that I love to sing is a hymn written by Eliza E. Hewitt, who lived more than 150 years ago. She was born in Philadelphia, became a school teacher, and later became an administrator, and she wrote several hundred hymns. Arguably, her most famous is When We All Get to Heaven. The hymn begins, "Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing his mercy and his grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, he'll prepare for us a place." And the chorus goes, "When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory." Now, as I said, I love to sing that song. We sang it at my mom and dad's funeral a number of years ago. We also sang it a few weeks back at Lois Dumichel's funeral. And as I was thinking about that song, something occurred to me. And that is, it's easy to sing and shout the victory when we see Jesus face to face. There's really no reason not to. I mean, after all, anyone would do that. But Jesus wants us to sing and shout the victory now, in the middle of life's battles, during the highs and the lows. What's more, anyone can celebrate after the final whistle of life is blown, when we've won and the score is set in stone and there's no further plays to run. But how do you celebrate the victory when there's still battles to be fought? When we still have to face the enemy? One of the themes that's found in the Bible is that in the middle of our conflicts, we're to rejoice and give thanks. We're to sing and celebrate. Jesus, in his hillside sermon in Matthew 5, said, "When men revile you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake, rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Habakkuk, in a passage that I referenced a few weeks back in Habakkuk 3, says, "Though the fig tree should not blossom, and there be no fruit on the vines, though the yields of the olive tree should fail, and the fields produce no food, though the flock should be cut off from the fold, and there be no cattle in the stalls, yet I will exalt in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord is my strength, and he has made my feet like hinds' feet. He causes me to walk on high places." And so we're told to rejoice. We're told to give thanks. I love the story of Paul and Silas, who had been unjustly arrested and beaten half to death and then thrown into prison locks. They were put in stocks and double locked in the cells, and they were left there for the night. And as you read their story in Acts 16, amazingly, in the middle of their pain and anguish, they rejoiced in the Lord. And it says at midnight, Paul and Silas began praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. And that night, God sent a jail-sized earthquake that blew the doors off their hinges and broke the chains and left that jailer with a lesson he would remember to his dying day. That night, great victories were won for Christ. And it all started when two hurting warriors decided to pray and sing and give thanks to God. And I'm hopeful that as we celebrate Thanksgiving, that we will sing and give God praise and thanks, even in the middle of the pain and the difficulties and the challenges. And we've certainly had our share this past year. But hopefully we'll realize that the song that honors God the most is the song sung by faith and not by feeling. Nothing honors him more than faith. In fact, the writer of the book of Hebrews says, without faith, it is impossible to please God. I want to close by telling a story about a pastor named Jack Hinton, who pastored in New Bern, North Carolina. A few years back, he took a church group on a missions trip to Tobago in the Caribbean. One day, the group visited a leprosarium to minister to the patients. And as they spread out across the campus, they had their hearts broken when they saw what leprosy had done to the human body. Soon the administrator invited them to hold a worship service in their little chapel. And that Carolina group lined across the front of the chapel as the lepers entered. And that's when Pastor Jack saw something intriguing. One of the women lepers walked in and sat down on the back row in such a way that she faced the rear wall. He thought that strange, but they continued with the service. As Jack led the songs, they had prayers and testimonies and scripture reading. And finally he announced, folks, we have time for one more song. Does anyone have a favorite hymn you'd like us to sing? And for the first time, that little woman on the back row turned to the front, and Pastor Jack found himself staring into the most hideous face he had ever seen. Because of leprosy, this poor woman had no lips and no nose. And when she raised her hand to make her request, there was no hand there, just a bony nub. And she said, could we sing Count Your Many Blessings? And at that, Jack lost it. His eyes welled up with tears, his throat choked off his voice, and he was unable to get a word out. In fact, he had to step outside, and he began to weep. Another member of the group stepped up and led the song, while one of the men walked out and put his arm around his pastor. And he said, you'll never sing that song again, will you, Jack? And the pastor responded, oh, yes, I will, but not in the same way. Let me ask you, can you sing in the middle of your pain? In the middle of a Thanksgiving that is seemingly anything but normal? Let me remind you that if you cannot, if everything has to be perfect before you can give thanks, you never will. What's more, there's a little woman in a leper hospital in the Caribbean who's putting us to shame. Paul said, rejoice in the Lord always. Again I say, rejoice. And so with that before us, let's now go to prayer.